Today I'm gonna talk about pets and family. It's my last day of my residency on Governor's Island, and I hope everything goes well because I'm not very technical. But this is Pandele. She's my doggy. She's a lot to me. I will tell you how I got my Pandele and where I am because of Pandele. I grew up in Romania, and in Romania, dogs and cats were not pets under communists. They were utilitarian beings. They were tools. Pandele would have had a rough life in Romania. No? You want to sit down? You don't want video anymore? She would have been chained. She would have never been let in the house, let alone sleep in the bed with her human. I grew up like this, you know. You can say it was a cruel society, but I think it came out of fear and ignorance and a need to feel superior to something, another creature, I guess. We were a gossipy society. Dogs were the security system. They would be trained to bark and bite. Cats were the anti-vermin, the Department of Sanitation, deratization. Never in the house, never hold in your arms, never belly scratches. At least in my family and in my village and then in my hometown, and even when I moved to the capital, dogs were not vaccinated, were not sterilized. As a result, there were a lot of feral dogs, wild dogs, roaming in packs around Bucharest. I don't want to badmouth the place where I grew up, but even recently, I don't know, 5 years ago, there was a huge scandal in Bucharest because a grandma didn't supervise her toddler, and the toddler got killed by stray dogs. The way it controlled the proliferation of dogs were either to drown the puppies or to throw them over a fence to veterinarian clinics. Let them deal with it. So I remember when I was small in the village that we had a puppy. I don't know if it was a he or a she, but it was so fluffy, like down, goose down. And I remember holding it. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And we went, my parents were agricultural engineers, and we went to the cooperative. It was in the fall. It was a foggy day. Probably they didn't have whom to leave me at home, so they took me to the orchard where the peasants were gathering apples in hills, what I perceived hills, being so small. And somehow my little dog, she got lost. And so I remember I was crying, I was so inconsolable. And somehow my father put word out there, and my puppy was retrieved in the evening, and he said, "Here is your dog, don't cry anymore." But poor Gemotok means like a little fur ball. He or she grew up into a vicious dog. And so there was no more playtime with the dog, and ever since we had always a dog around the property. There was no friendship. Well, my father must have loved dogs, because I remember he had, in our family photo albums, he had a photograph with a German Shepherd. German Shepherds are held in high esteem in my country. Almost every yard in my small town has a German Shepherd trying to break down the wire fence when you pass by. And this dog was with the paws on my father's shoulders. And when I left home, I came to America. My sister lived with my parents and my nephew. And my nephew got a German Shepherd. She, Puffy was her name, which means fluffy again. She was the offspring of a circus performer. And you know how kids are. Some kids are, they don't take care after a while. They realize you have to feed the dog, clean after the dog, walk the dog. This not happen, so the dog was prisoner in the animal yard. But I remember that she loved my father, and I remember my father smiling when Puffy was again with her paws on my father's shoulders. And when my father died because of diabetes. His life was marred by alcoholism, and when he was in his late 60s, he was coming drunk from the pub and fell down and hit his head on the yard cement staircase, and they took him to the hospital. And while there, he had delirium tremens, and also they tested his blood, and it came out he was diabetic. He's been probably diabetic for 10 years, the doctor said. And so for a while he didn't drink, especially that my younger brother died because of drinking. He didn't drink. He said death has come to our home when my brother died. And for quite good years, he behaved himself. I was not in the household anymore, but my mother would ferociously make sure that the cellar was locked, the pantry was locked, so he didn't have access to drinking. After a while, in his 70s, he started to drink again. His friends would carry, plum brandy, which we are very proud of in my small little town, 75-degree brandy, proof. It killed a lot of the younger generation and the older. Often you know that the cause of death was cirrhosis of the liver. And in his 70s, he decided he's not going to work anymore. He said, I worked all my life. He would wake up at dawn, come back when it was dark. They would work 6 days a week, not 5, Saturdays too. And so most of my memories were about him having a hangover, sweeping the yard, being morose. And when he died, it came about because of too much sugar, I assume. His glycemic levels were 600. I remember one summer I went there and he wanted sugar in his coffee 3 spoons of coffee, of teaspoons, 3 teaspoons of sugar in his coffee. So he asked me to do that, to put the sugar in the coffee for him. And I said, well, where is the sugar? He says, you see there up on the cupboard, the salt container that says salt, that's where the sugar is. My mother would try to hide it, I guess. And so he fell on the ground in the kitchen, my sister and mother tell me, and he was convulsing, and they called the ambulance, but my father, when my mother kept on trying to ply him with tea, and my mother said, no, my father said, don't stop with the tea, I'm going now. And he was gone. So I couldn't go to his funeral. I was in the hospital then with operation. But then 2 months later, I went and well, I wanted to do something in his memory. I want to do something about the dog. I forgot to tell you, that dog, Poofy, hated me. I love the garden. So in order to get to the garden, I had to cross through the animal yard where she was chained. And she would bark, and she would attempt to jump on me. She would attempt to, her big mouth with the teeth. She would attempt at biting me. And so I would always have to say, Father or Mother, go and hold onto Poofy so I can go in the garden. And then on my way back again, Father, hold Poofy so I can come back to the house. This went on each time I went home for several years. But then, one year, my father says, Poofy started to be afraid of water. How come? Well, Cornell, our handyman, decided to give her a bath, and after he soaped her, she threw buckets of cold water on her. And ever since, she's afraid of water. So all you have to do is, you don't need to throw buckets of water on her to back off. All you need to do is to take a cup of water and drip, 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 drip. All right. He took the cup of water and he drip, 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 and Poofy backed off. Then he gave me the cup, and I crossed through the yard unmolested, unmauled. I enjoyed the garden, and on my way back, I called Poofy, and I drip, 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 dripped water, and she was cowering. She was hiding in her little kernel, and I started to terrorize Poofy. I would go in and out the garden with Poofy, drip, 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 because she was so horrid to me for so many years. Well, when my father died, I thought, the dog is left behind, nobody loves her, maybe I should do something about her. So I started right before my trip. I started reading Caesar, the Dog Whisperer. He's a fellow who explains that in order to be listened by your dog, you have to be the pack leader. They have to look at you as you are the pack leader. So I learned to be the pack leader, be confident, and they need to listen to you. So I was by the gate. Poofy was not barking at me. I told her, dear Poofy, I miss my father. He was kind, though he was mostly drunk. I miss my father, and I assume you miss him very much. And what do you think Puffy did? She was whining, and then I got over my fears and I stepped without water in the yard, and she put her head on her front paws. I didn't know, but I was explained by Cami, who is a dog lover. Cami rescued a puppy who was abandoned on a country road, a puppy who had worms in her wounds, and she healed that puppy, and she cherished that puppy. And when the puppy grew into a big dog and couldn't live in her apartment anymore because her mother was protesting, she found a location where Puffy, I think Bella is her name. She lived in a large enclosure. She had her own couch, and there was like a little village of dogs there, and the dog handler would walk them, and each weekend Camille would go and have happy time with her dog. So Camille told me that means that the dog is telling me that I'm her master. Well, I didn't want to be anybody's master or mistress. I just wanted to do some good things for this dog, who all her life was tied up in a chain because she was not allowed loose ever, because she would run around bound, a ball of energy, and destroy the flower beds in the front yard. So there was a hole there, dug. I asked my sister, what is that hole about? She said, well, Puffy thinks she is a papillon. If you watch the movie with Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman, in which Papillon is an Australian, or at least he's a convict in Australia and escapes through gruesome trials. And she was laughing, I have no beef with them. They didn't leave the country, they didn't see other people having dogs and getting love, and loving the dogs. They love the dog in their own way, but they would give him just leftovers, before like slops to eat. And the yard was full of Puffy's productions there, never swept, I cleaned. I went and I bought for her a big, I don't know how you would call it, ruda we call it, like a pole of salami, a stick of salami, bologna, turkey wings, and she ate and she ate and she ate. She was kind of sick after she ate too much, Then I thought, she needs to walk. So I found somewhere a leash. Maybe they walked her when she was small. There was a leash there. I put the leash around her head and I took her to the vet because her eyes were full of pus. And my mother protested, that what do I think, coming back from America with highfalutin ideas. They know how to take care of the animal. Well, I didn't mean any offense, She was just sitting there standing on the porch and looking hateful at me. I didn't mean anything. I just took care of the dog. Then I wanted to walk the dog more. So before taking her to the vet, I walked her around the yard, the backyard, then around the garden perimeter. She was pulling, but then she slowed down after a while. And then when we went in the front yard, my mother was saying, don't get out of the yard because Puffy's gonna kill somebody. Puffy didn't kill anybody. She was yanking me, so eager she was, but we went along the streets, up the hills, up to the forest, which was like 10 minutes out any part you go out of our town is forest. And there was a lot of barking. All the German shepherds chained were barking their head off at Puffy. Puffy would reply from time to time, but she found one dog that they conversed through the wire fence. They sniffed and they did their doggy things, and I guess she made a friend. Then we went back home, and usually she would bark at night, you know. That was her job, to bark, and other dogs would bark, everybody would bark. But this time she didn't bark. So in the afternoon, a neighbor comes at our gate and asks me if the dog is dead. Is Puffy dead? I said, why? Well, because she was not barking. Oh, I said, no. She's just tired. She's content because she walked about town. So that was it. After a month, I left. I came back to New York, and I was thinking about her. I was even considering bringing her to New York, but I didn't have the financial resources to pay for her airplane ticket or how to keep her in a small apartment, you know. I couldn't. And she was old and worn out. She was 11. I understand that's not that old, but I remember her yellow teeth, you know, were like a rake, almost falling out of her old gums. And in 2 months or so, my sister tells me that Puffy is in the hospital. She got pneumonia by sitting on top of a dog kennel in the rain. Now this was not even a summer rain. This was spring, you know, it was cold. And to me, a dog who hates water getting up on a kennel felt like suicide. I was thinking maybe I did no good for this dog, because in the little time that I was there, I showed her a better life. And then, you know, my father being dead, there was no love for her. And then being again, you know, back to slops and no walking about, maybe she just gave up, she had enough. Because I can't explain it and otherwise. So I felt bad, and so I said, on my next trip, I'm gonna adopt a dog. This is Pandele. Pandele is a Romanian dog. I saw her on a video. The animal association in the city nearby sent me. I asked for, I would like to adopt a puppy, and they showed me Pandele and her sisters, and Pandele was barking so vehemently, and she was just so gorgeous, a little thing. I said, if it's possible to hold her in foster care, I'll pay for it for 3 more months. When I come to visit my homeland and pick her up, I'd pay for the expense. And they hold her for me. So I got paperwork from my doctor, who said that a dog would really help me with my depression and PTSD and anxiety. A dog is not like a cat. A dog gets you out of the house, even on bad days. So I listened to him and I made the arrangements, all in secret. Neither my son knew, who lived with me at that time, nor my parents, my mother or my sister. So I went to Cluj, where she was in a clinic recovering from her sterilization operation, and got her shots and got rid of her fleas. And I went to pick her up on a really, really hot August day. And she was the most delicate and sweet being I've ever seen. She would be so suave and timid. I hold her in my arms. She did not want to walk. She was 6 months old. It's true, it was very hot, the pavement was melting, but she didn't want to walk. Even in the evening, she would just not want to walk. She didn't want to lose me from her side. She would cry. I put her like in a zip up tent for dogs, you know, when I arrived home to my mother's home. Well, I was spending time with her.